Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone after a little bit of a break. So I've been contemplating which subject to talk about, and basically I follow up on inspirations or what's going on in my life around me. And so I decided that the most important subject for now was the subject of wasting time. Now, I wasn't sure whether I should talk about it or something else, and I open up my computer. Okay, Jung would call this synchronicity, the Sufis would call this an act of God. I open up the computer, and what's the first thing I see? I haven't seen something like this in a long time. I see the following. I don't know if it's obvious. Possibly you can't see it, but you should be able to see the picture of Sheikh Nazim. So I open up the computer, and there's a picture of Sheikh Nazim. I haven't seen one of those on my internet for quite a while, saying the following thing. MashaAllah. Okay. Call it synchronicity, the atheist would call it serendipity, and the believers call it an ayat of Allah. The followers of a Sufi way, 4 followers of a Sufi way, wasting time, either idly or in useless activity, is the greatest sin. The greatest sin. Guard your vital energy and your valuable time. Make every moment alive. Maulana Sheikh Nazim. MashaAllah. Okay, when I see that I know, right subject. Time wasting. It's a biggie in the modern world for all people, Sufis and non-Sufis alike. Now, I usually like to base my talks on Quranic ayat, and the word that comes up in the Quran that's closest to the word of wasting time is lagwa. Lam, Ghain, Wa. But the actual translation is usually idle gossip, which is one way of wasting time. But some of the translators have translated it as frivolity. Now, why is this such an important subject? Because the modern world has developed an expertise in this area of time wasting, of which, the cellulars and the computers and Netflix, etc., 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 are just some of the instruments. Wasting time has become the MO of the modern world. So what is the MO? What is the natural time cycle of, let's say, American Joe? Goes to work in the morning, comes home in the early evening, exhausted, has supper, and then watches spectator sports in the evening. While he's watching spectator sports, his wife is watching Netflix in another room, one series after the other. Okay? This is the paradigm of life in modern times. One way of wasting time. So we have numerous ways. Let's see if we can think, and you think also, of some of the ways that you are good at wasting time. Okay. The danger for me personally is watching too much news. Now, I believe people should know what's going on in the world, so I don't agree with several of my shuyukh who told people not to be involved at all in news and politics. I think people should know what's going on. Specifically at this point in time, Kamala Harris. Okay, that's a whole other discussion. We won't go there. But, find out what's going on, listen to a bit of commentary, and then move on. I had a client whose father spent his whole day watching CNN. Maybe now with everything going on, maybe now he's doing it with Fox News. But it all comes down to the same. By the way, if you need a news station, you want to get something relatively objective and data-based, fact-based, I recommend Epoch Times to everyone. They're the best news. There's a little bit of an overemphasis on China, but aside from that, you get all the news that's fit to print, as the New York Times says. Now they only the news that the Democrats would approve of. Okay, that's a whole other story. Okay, so how do we waste time? One of the most popular ways of wasting time is spectator sports. Hadi, my associate, is not big on that, thank God. I remember an iconic trip with my daughter to Paris. I might have mentioned it on these videos before. And we were in Paris during the time of the World Cup. This must be, I don't know, 7 years ago, 6 years ago. So I went to the dhikr of the Qasimi people in the arrondissement of Paris. There were about 30, 35 people there. My daughter wanted to go to the Tour d'Eiffel, the Eiffel Tower. So I took her to the Eiffel Tower. There were probably about 30,000 people there. So from 30 to 30,000. And as the World Cup was going on, there were 300 million watching the World Cup. Okay. This is time, even if your national team is there, okay, you can relax, but watching a lot of spectator sports, this is one of the height of wasting time. Playing sports, that's another thing that's good for your physical fitness. It's enjoyable and it's better than just watching. But watching sports in America with a beer in your hand and some chips in the other hand, and you're good to go. Everyone thinks it's fine. The ladies often prefer the Netflix series. It's another way usually of wasting time. Occasionally you get something educational, but most of the time you're wasting time. And I make one exception, personal preference. The American series, The Big Bang Theory, brilliant. The only series I like are those that have some social commentary. Yeah, the other one was the British series, Keeping Up Appearances. It's also worth your time because they're social commentary essentially, and sometimes very brilliant. On the other hand, programs like Friends and no, those you can probably best avoid. As in most TV series, forget it. So that's the second way. Spectator sports of all kinds. In Quebec, we had bingo games. Many people spent many hours. You probably don't know that culture, especially outside the cities. The biggest event is bingo games. Another useless way. Oh, personal story of time wasting before I had any kind of religious instruction. 1 second. I'm just going to place the fan. It's getting a bit warm here. No. So I like doing sabbatical. I don't like doing sabbaticals. I made it a matter of principle to do sabbaticals so that I could get away from my usual world. And the first sabbatical I did was in Sweden. And Sweden had, they were very advanced, they still are. They had a library that was open 24/7. And in that library there were all kinds of books. There was a stereo system there. This is before the internet, before all that. We had all these discs that we listened to classical music, read literature from all around the world. And there was a chess room. At the time I really loved chess. So one day I got into the chess room and I lost my sense of time. I played right through the night. I must have done 18, 20, maybe even more hours of chess. And I woke up in the morning in the chess room, blurry-eyed. I didn't have to go to work, I don't think, that day, I hope. And on my way home I said, that's it, it's over. I've never played more than a half an hour or so of chess since then. It easily becomes an addiction, another way of wasting time. I think in the card games, a lot of people get stuck in those, even if they're not gambling. Another waste of time. I think in the Arab world, backgammon is very popular also. Do you know that game? Yeah, I think there's a lot of backgammon studios where Arabs play backgammon. Every society has its way of wasting time. The Italian community where I grew up, they would all go to the local coffee shop, which was a billiard place, and they'd hang out there. But one of the most extreme examples I've seen, and in a way it's paradoxical, in some of the ethnic Muslim societies, they spend time in their families. And they have religious justification because the Quran talks about bir walidain, respecting your parents, being obedient to your parents, and rahim wasila, keeping contact with the extended family. And they interpret that to mean that hanging out with your family for hours and hours and hours on end is fine, is part of your religious responsibility. Wrong. Most of that time is wasted. I was absolutely astonished when I lived in Jordan for a year. I lived in an apartment block, and on both sides of the apartment block were these relatively large buildings that were designed for extended families. And they would have visitors come over, uncles and aunties and cousins and whatever, and they would literally hang out for hours and hours and hours at a time. And they think it's fine, and it isn't. So you can even waste time in something that you think is spiritually correct, but it isn't if you're wasting time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't visit your family, pay respect to your family, help out your family, but sitting around drinking tea, as they do in Britain, the teacuppers, but the teacuppers their time is limited, but this seemed to be unlimited time. Wrong. That is laghou, actually in the specific meaning of the term, idle gossip, day and night. And sometimes they're silent and sometimes they're just gossiping together, and it's really, well, I don't know, if I take what Sheikh Nazim just said, it's actually haram to do that. But a lot of people, so beware. If you're in one of those milieus, one of those societies, it's fine, be respectful, be nice, be kind, be helpful with your family, but don't spend hours and hours hanging out, eating baklava, and drinking overly sweet tea. That is not Islam. Another way of wasting time, and I've seen a lot of people do this, is useless tourism. So this is promulgated by marketing all over the place of tourism. There was a book I read a long time ago at my aunt's house. My aunt was a kind of Boston intellectual. And the book was a book called The Decline of the American Empire. There was a Quebec film writer who made a movie about it, Le Déclin de l'Empire Américain, The Decline of the American Empire. And one of the chapters in it was titled, I found the title very interesting, From Travel to Tourism. Totally different. Okay, so in the old days, people traveled for a purpose. They were going to do their Hajj. They were going to learn something, going to learn about art in Europe, going to learn about calligraphy in Turkey, or even going to study the societies from a sociological. That's one thing. But going around in a guided tour from one tourist site to the next, largely time wasting. I was just telling Hadi before about my first trip to Europe when I realized, and I got to France, and one of the things I had always wanted to see was the palace at Versailles. It's amazing. Louis XIV's, this great palace, and I went to see it, and it was like my heart sunk. It was like inside, it felt like, so what? But actually, paradoxically, I learned something there. No matter how beautiful the dunya is, this is in Europe you will see, more than America, more than Canada, you will see dunya, worldliness, at its highest, most sophisticated, most aesthetic level. Still dunya. It's still worldliness, and it's poison for the heart. Okay, so you can think about in your own life all the ways you waste time and see what the alternatives are. Try not to waste. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't relax. That doesn't mean that you should become a workaholic. I'll tell you a story about workaholism. Doesn't mean you should become a workaholic. But there needs to be some rest, some relaxation, but don't make rest and relaxation the purpose of your life. My parents grew up in the 50s, post-World War II, and they had a theme song in the house. Enjoy yourself, it's later than you think, enjoy yourself. And those were their values, really. Very sad. That the most important thing in life is to enjoy. And you know people everywhere, even amongst the Muslims, that think that enjoying yourself is what life's about. Wrong. Excuse me for being so blunt. Wrong. There may be some enjoyment. We're not against enjoyment. Don't make it the purpose of your life. The workaholic story. Now, where are the most workaholics? America. Even the Germans don't. The Germans work very hard, very timely, very efficiently, but they stop work and then they do other things. But they're Americans that just work. Sometimes I used to say, work is the only virtue left in America. So I had a friend who lived next door, who was a very good student, got admitted for a master's program in Berkeley, and came back 9 months later with ulcerative colitis. I said, what happened? His name was Gerald. I said, what happened, Gerald? He said, you wouldn't believe it. Okay, we both had gone to McGill together. McGill is a demanding institution, but not particularly crazy relative to other universities. I said, what happened? He said, it's unbelievable. I said, you were at Berkeley. For me, Berkeley was student rebellion, new left, new age, everything. He said, no, not for the students. He said, the library was open 24/7. He said, and the typical student would go to the library after classes, or have supper, go to the library after classes, fall asleep at his desk at 2 a.m, wake up at 7, have a coffee and go back to class. That is workaholism for the student. And there are people who work like that as well. What was his name? I remember he was the fellow who was responsible, Michael Milken, for junk bonds. He said before he was arrested, because what he was doing was fraudulent, he was working so much, he said, I ate lunch and supper at the work table as I was doing my work, day and night. You'll see this with American politicians. Canadian ones are lazier. I'm not saying too lazy, but lazier. You know, American politicians, sometimes they'll have hearings or they'll have an issue, they'll be there to 2, 3 in the morning to decide something. And sometimes they're on break and they're called back because they have something to deal with. Work. The American politicians work hard. They may be totally corrupt, totally misguided, totally misinformed, but they're hardworking. Yeah. Too hardworking. Okay, so I think you're getting some of the idea about what this subject is all about. Now, when I first came to Islam, I was in Jerusalem, and I met a man in the old market, the old city of Jerusalem, in the market. And during the day, he was selling fruits and vegetables. And at night, he was a barber shop. And I would come by sometimes and I said, "You're always here. Don't you ever rest?" I said to him. And he said to me something interesting. He said, "Look, from our point of view as Muslims, the rest is in the Akhirah. There's no rest in the world." I think that's a bit of an extremist position, but there's some truth in it. There's no rest in this world. You go to the beach, the beach, sand and sea. By the second day, you're bored to death. By the third day, your mind is starting to generate anxieties for you in a typical fashion. If you haven't gotten tourista or some other kind of virus that makes you sick, your mind starts going weird on you because it needs something to occupy itself. Sand and sea just don't cut it for the human being, because we're here with a mission. And that's the other really important point here. Time, why is it bad to waste time? Because time is a gift, a ni'mat, a fadl in Arabic. Time is a gift from God. So if you waste it, you're kind of disrespecting the gift. We're here to do our work, to do our mission, to help people, to get closer to Allah. There's a lot of good things we can do with the gift of time, other than just wasting it. Now, once again, I'll repeat, I don't mean you should never relax. Relaxing is okay. Just don't make it the default position of your life. Relax when you're tired. Get a good night's sleep also. Some of the great Sufis didn't do that, but I think as a general rule, they were exceptional people. As a general rule, get some sleep. Rest is very important. Oh, okay. Related to this subject, something that came up today in another session I've been doing is the whole issue. This is connected, you'll see. The whole issue of pot smoking, marijuana. This is one of the greatest tools for wasting time. One of the great tools of the shaitan, if you want, is marijuana. Now, when I used to go to psychiatric conferences, the psychiatrists were unanimous. Believe it or not, the government doesn't care. They're too politically correct. On this one, the psychiatrists had it right, because we've seen lots of people, especially mothers, who would come to me crying in despair. Their son, it was usually the male, spent his time smoking pot and playing video games. And that's all he was doing. Not working, not going to school, not looking for a job, smoking pot and watching videos. That became a protocol of some of the young men who didn't know exactly what to do with their lives. Okay, so pot, marijuana, it can be medicinal, but even as a medicine you have to be careful. It's very addictive. And anyone who said CBD is not psychoactive is lying, because even CBD will make you slow down and chill and not wanting to do anything. One of my principal teachers in psychiatry was a guy called Dr. Lehman, and he was part of one of the original studies on marijuana, the Ledane Commission, which we did in Canada. We were in the avant-garde, the 1950s. And one of the conclusions of the Ledane Commission, that one of the side effects of long-term marijuana use was the amotivational syndrome. Just chill, man. Just lie there, like the opium eaters in the Greek novel The Odyssey by Homer. Just lie on the island, smoke dope, don't do anything. Life is good. Be zen, as the New Agers used to say. So beware of the pot. It's a very dangerous substance. Mostly it's the parents, sometimes it's the partners of the males that are most subject to pot addiction. and they're driven to despair, literally, about their adult, pot-addicted partners or children, and it's very hard to get off them. The last time I had to deal with this, we have a very good addiction center in Montreal called the Dollard Cormier Center, and I was concerned more about because some people manage to keep up their life on pot, but some of the video game addictions are even worse. So I called them up and I said, I know that it's unlikely, it's not really addictive, but do you guys have any counselors for video game addiction? And the lady said, of course, we just hired 3 more full-time counselors for video game addiction. This was several years back. I don't know where it's at now, but they're probably still got a number of people who are another completely useless activity. And some people try to, it makes us think more clearly, it makes us have better reflexes. This is all BS. It's another form of addiction and another form of time wasting. Beware of both of those, video games and pot. Now there are a few indications for marijuana to control pain, to control epilepsy, a few things like that, but recreational marijuana was a really bad idea by the government, but it became part of in Canada, the Trudeau political correctness. You can't be against it, but most of my psychiatric colleagues are against it. So one of the takeaway messages here is that you have to be able to pace yourself also. Okay? So we're being people of the middle way. We don't want to be overly ambitious, workaholic, overly goal-oriented people. We want to be in the here and now, but we don't want to be of the lazy, passive, be zen people who don't do anything. Okay? And there's an inner voice inside each of us that will tell us if what we're doing is right or wrong. The problem with drugs like marijuana is they kind of stifle, they make you deaf to the inner voice. Because, oh man, this feels good, I'm so cool, I'm so chill. You know, when you stop listening to the inner voice warning you that what you're doing is not good. I'm just checking my notes here to just see that I didn't miss any of the important points. But just remember, if you look around, you'll see that, from the ilm, fiqh, Islamic sciences perspective, the ulama, Sheikh Nazim just said it very clearly, the ulama are not so clear. If you Google in time wasting, it's kind of... So because our Prophet ﷺ was recorded having a race with his wife Aisha when they were playing around, or allowing Aisha radiallahu anha to play with her dolls, or to play with his grandsons, then recreation is terrific, right across the board. I'm sure, without having his daily schedule of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the Sahaba were close to him, they didn't waste time. Not saying they didn't rest, but they didn't waste time. It's impossible. So because he raced one time with Aisha, or she played with dolls, or he played with, that's all fine. But it's not the same as time wasting. And your inner voice knows which is which. And this is why, I discovered this early in my life, why vacation can be such a hassle. Such a contradiction. You're going to rest and you can't rest. Why? Because your conscience is telling you you're wasting your time. So if you're caught in one of those time-wasting situations that you can't get out of immediately, make it into a learning experience. You know, try to, wherever you are, you can learn something. Even in Toronto, believe it or not. Montreal and Toronto are always in competition. But even in Toronto, anywhere, you can make things into a learning experience. Like the first time I went to Europe, and I felt this. What are we doing here? With my friend from medical school. And I said, you know what? Alan was his name. I said, we're going to go visit the museums, the art museums, and we're going to make this into a history of art course. Not a bad idea. I could feel the time wasting. I didn't like it. I said, let's make this into a learning experience. So we started going around the museums, especially in Paris. Amazing museums of all kinds. Museum of Modern Art, the Louvre, the Renoir Museum. And we went around. But then we got into the opposite. Don't forget, we're medical students. So by definition, we're workaholics. We're obsessive. So what we started doing is memorizing the names of the painters and the paintings and testing each other. This is how easy you can slip back into your habit. So we're these compulsive medical students who now became compulsive students of art history. No, that's not what I'm recommending. And I caught it and I said to him, you know, Alan, we've gone crazy here. He said, what do you mean? I said, we made this into medical school. He got it. At least he was open-minded enough to get it, and we tried to slow down the pace. Okay, but those are the issues. Don't be compulsive and don't be lazy, and somewhere in between the two, you'll find your satisfaction, your afia, your peace of mind. May Allah grant us this peace of mind, this balance, this moderation in all things in our life, inshallah, and that's what's most propitious for us to feel our contact with our essence and thereby with our Lord. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Okay, so now you can go and rest. LOL. No. You can rest if it's at the end of your day, but be careful not to over rest. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum.